Hello friends, welcome again. In this video, I'm going to talk with you about a term called as biodiversity, right? So first we will see what is the meaning of this term biodiversity. Then we'll see what are the different types of biodiversity that exists on the surface of the earth. And also we'll see what are the factors basically which are um, influencing the biodiversity on the surface of the earth, right? And at the end of the topic, we are going to discuss about the what are the different methods, conservation methods that we are adopting to safeguard this biodiversity. And also we'll talk about the at the international level what efforts also we are doing in order to conserve the biodiversity, right? So let us start with understanding the meaning of the term called as biodiversity. You can have a look over this particular picture. It is going to give you an overview that what biodiversity could mean, right? So basically when we say biodiversity, this particular word is made up of two words. First portion, bio means biological, and the other term is called as diversity. So that means diversity is the variety in something, right? Like different forms, right? So when we talk about the variety in biological things or biological forms, different life forms, then we say it is a biodiversity. So when we say that at any particular place you are having a great biodiversity, then it means that you are having a huge variety of those living those organisms that are present in that particular area, right? So simple term mein, when we say biodiversity, it means we are talking about the variety of life forms that exist in that particular area, right? तो उसको हमने नाम दे दिया biodiversity. Like you would have different, इस पिक्चर में अगर बात करें हम, you are having like different kinds of plants, you are having different kinds of animals and all that. तो ये क्या है? This is a variety, right? Different kinds of species that you are exist over this particular that you can have, right? Not only when we say biodiversity, so diversity simply does not mean that different kinds of species only, right? Here you could have like as a parrot as a species, then you're having as a cat as a species, snake as a species. So these are the different kinds of species. So हम बोल सकते हैं this is a biodiversity that is existing over there. But diversity also means, मतलब in this particular word, we also include the diversity that also exists within the species. For example, अगर मैं parrot as a species ले लूं, तो as you know, no two parrots can have the same characteristics, right? So इसका मतलब है कि within species also you are going to have a great amount of diversity, right? So all these things, different kinds of species, diversity within the species, that will fall under the ambit of biodiversity, right? Okay, now let's see this term in detail. The word biodiversity is the combination of two words, biological and diversity, right? Here, the term is given a variety of life on the earth and natural patterns it forms, different kinds of patterns, different kind of relationship that are going to exist because of these different life forms. It is a variety in difference among living organisms from all sources. कुछ भी हो सकता है, anywhere on the surface of the earth. It could be terrestrial, marine, or other aquatic ecosystem, and the ecological complexes which they are a part, right? Obviously, they are going to form a different kind of ecosystem and ecological relations. So basically, all different life forms को हमने नाम दे दिया है biodiversity. Thus, in a sense, biodiversity represent all the life or all the different life forms को हमने नाम दे दिया biodiversity, right? So the same has been mentioned over here. Just it is a way of expressing these things. Biodiversity is a degree of variation that is different life forms. किसमें life forms within a given species ecosystem. See, life form variation in the life forms within given species, right? Given species के अंदर, ecosystem के अंदर, biome के अंदर, entire planet के ऊपर. So whichever way you consider that variety is existing, so we will say that is a biodiversity is over that particular area. And mostly, not totally, but in part का मतलब mostly जो biodiversity किसी place पे है, that is a function of climate, right? Normally, as you know, tropical area, they are having that abundance of that different life forms because you are having sufficient like sunlight, you are having sufficient rainfall and all that. So it means in areas where you're going to have a lot of different life forms that are going to exist over here. तो हम बोलेंगे that biodiversity इस एरिया में क्या है, बहुत ज्यादा है. As you move towards the polar areas या desert areas की बात जब हम करेंगे, so there जो बेसिक लाइफ के नेसेसिटीज हैं, दे आर लेसर. सो ऑब्वियसली द डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ लाइफ फॉर्म्स that can exist in those areas will also be less. तो उस केस में हम बोल सकते हैं to a certain extent जो climate है that determines the abundance of those that particular biodiversity in that particular area. In terrestrial habitats, tropical regions are typically rich in biodiversity, whereas polar regions support fewer species, because ultimately for the survival of those species you need to have all those resources. So zyada resources kahan par aapko in the like tropical areas mein you'll find all those resources, whereas when you talk about in terms of like as we're moving towards the polar areas or maybe in the desert biomes or desert ecosystem as we discussed, there you don't have that all those resources, and therefore the biodiversity that you are going to have in those areas will be less. And in 1992 United Nations Earth Summit, we have already discussed about the Earth Summit के बारे में already हमने discuss किया है. In climate change, the biological diversity is defined as the variability among the living organism from all sources, right? सारे sources कौन से हो गए? Marine हो गए, aquatic हो गए, या maybe you are having like others also, you are having terrestrial, ecological complexes of which they are part. This include diversity within species. अच्छा, यही मैंने बात शुरू में ही आपसे की. It could that is एक कोई पर्टिकुलर स्पीसीज लोगे, उसके अगर ह्यूमन एज ए स्पीसीज अगर मैं बात करता हूं, नॉट ऑल ह्यूमंस आर सेम. देयर आर ह्यूज वैरायटी इन द बायोलॉजिकल फॉर्म्स विद इन द ह्यूमंस इटसेल्फ. दैट मींस स्पीसीज के अंदर भी डाइवर्सिटी है. दैट इज द मीनिंग ऑफ दिस डाइवर्सिटी विद इन द स्पीसीज एंड बिटवीन स्पीसीज. बिटवीन स्पीसीज मतलब डिफरेंट काइंड्स ऑफ स्पीसीज, ह्यूमन एज ए स्पीसीज, एनिमल एज ए स्पीसीज, प्लांट एज ए स्पीसीज, समथिंग दैट वे, एंड ऑफ ecosystems. And if you talk about ecosystem, मैं ऐसे ही बात कर सकता हूं, तो you are having like different kinds of ecosystem, then obviously in हर एक ecosystem में you're going to have different kinds of biological forms. तो उसको मैंने नाम दे दिया biodiversity. This definition is used by United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. I hope you remember this. We have already discussed under this particular summit, Earth Summit में हमने कन्वेंशन CBD, कन्वेंशन ऑन बायोलॉजिकल डाइवर्सिटी जो है वो डिस्कस किया था, राइट? सो दिस डेफिनेशन हैज बीन यूटिलाइज्ड बाय दैट पर्टिकुलर कन्वेंशन ऑन बायोलॉजिकल डाइवर्सिटी, दैट व्हाट शुड बी द मीनिंग ऑफ बायोडाइवर्सिटी. तो इसको बहुत ही सिंपल टर्म में आपने बात करनी है. तो बायोडाइवर्सिटी क्या है? दैट इज वैरायटी ऑफ लाइफ फॉर्म्स that exists on the surface of earth, including the variety that exists within those species also, right? Now let us see under this umbrella term, or you can say under the biodiversity, what kind of diversity could be there. Broadly हम जो biodiversity है उसको 3 categories में divide करते हैं. That हम types of diversity की बात करें, so you could have like 3 types of biodiversities. या that is simply ये बोल सकते हो आप कि जो biodiversity है that is made up of these 3 types of biodiversity. That is biodiversity in itself include these terms, right? That is how you have to see this. One is species diversity, जो हमने जैसे हमने बात की. Species मतलब you are having different kinds of species. Lion as a species, like maybe like you are having plant as a species, right? You're having like insects as a species, parrot as a species. So ये क्या है? Different kinds of species हैं. तो when you're having different kinds of species, then we will say that this is a species diversity. Number of species in a community, right, is referred to as a species richness. कितना रिच है वो पर्टिकुलर एरिया विद डिफरेंट लाइफ फॉर्म्स, डिफरेंट स्पीसीज से, उसको हमने नाम दे दिया स्पीसीज डाइवर्सिटी. सेम वे वी हैव अनदर टर्म कॉल्ड एज इकोलॉजिकल डाइवर्सिटी. इकोलॉजिकल मतलब डिफरेंट टाइप्स ऑफ इकोसिस्टम. जितना आपका जो है डिफरेंट एक पर्टिकुलर अगर एरिया में यू आर हैविंग डिफरेंट काइंड्स ऑफ इकोसिस्टम, देन वी विल से दैट एरिया इज रिच इन बायोडाइवर्सिटी, राइट? तो एक तो हमने बात की स्पीसीज ही अलग अलग है, डिफरेंट स्पीसीज, यू आर हैविंग डिफरेंट स्पीसीज. Second, we are saying you are having different types of ecosystem. So larger the number of different ecosystems, that means we'll say obviously you're going to have the different variety of like life forms that will exist on those ecosystem. So that will also, इसका मतलब है कि biodiversity also include ecological बोल सकते हो आप, या you can just also call it as a ecosystem diversity. Right, it is a variation in the ecosystem. Yeah, different kind of ecosystem in a region, found in a region, or the variation ecosystem, or the variation in the ecosystem over the whole planet. It includes the variation in the both terrestrial or aquatic ecosystems. As simple as that. Different types of ecosystems. If you have larger the number of different types of ecosystem, you will say that it is a इकोसिस्टम डाइवर्सिटी, वो ज्यादा डाइवर्स है वो पर्टिकुलर बहुत सारे इकोसिस्टम्स हैं, तो हम बोल सकते हैं इट इज ए इकोलॉजिकल डाइवर्सिटी बहुत ज्यादा है उस एरिया में. फॉर एग्जांपल वी हैव ऑलरेडी डिस्कस रेन फॉरेस्ट के बारे में, हमने डिस्कस किया डिफरेंट टाइप्स ऑफ इकोसिस्टम में. आई ऑलरेडी डिस्कस विद यू एक्चुअली आल्सो कोरल रीफ्स जो है एज ए बायोम और एज एन इकोसिस्टम वी कैन डिस्कस इट सेपरेटली. सो दीज ऑल वी हैव ऑलरेडी डिस्कस विद यू डिफरेंट टाइप्स ऑफ इकोसिस्टम. मैंग्रोव जो है आई एम गोइंग टू डिस्कस इन दिस पर्टिकुलर वीडियो कि मैंग्रोव जो है व्हाट काइंड ऑफ वेजिटेशन और पर्टिकुलर इकोसिस्टम मैंग्रोव इज. सो लाइक वी हैव डेजर्ट इकोसिस्टम, ट्रॉपिकल रेन फॉरेस्ट हमने बात की, रेन फॉरेस्ट अदर deciduous forest and all those depending upon how we are mountainous areas या all that way. So different types of ecosystems we are having, तो उसको हमने नाम दे दिया ecological और ecosystem diversity. तो larger number of ecosystems you will say ecologically जो है बहुत diverse है, ecosystem wise जो है it is very diverse. Another form of diversity is known as genetic biodiversity, right? So basically as I said that is the variation within a particular species. एक थे कि आपके different types of species exist कर रही हैं, then the other one is कि same ही species में जो variation है. For example, if I consider human being as a species, then no two human beings can be same, exactly same through different, like in terms of different characteristics. So that difference is because of that within that species you are having the genetic जो डाइवर्सिटी एग्जिस्ट कर रही है, बिकॉज यू आर हैविंग द डिफरेंट जेनेटिक मटेरियल विद इन ऑल दोस विद इन दैट पर्टिकुलर स्पीसीज, राइट? तो उसको नाम दे दिया हमने जेनेटिक डाइवर्सिटी. जेनेटिक डाइवर्सिटी इज द अमाउंट ऑफ वेरिएशन किसमें? इन द जेनेटिक मटेरियल. जो कि जेनेटिक मटेरियल आपका है, जेनेटिक मटेरियल बेसिकली क्या है? फॉर एग्जांपल एट द वेरी बेसिक लेवल यू आर गोइंग टू हैव द जीन्स, right? I hope you have heard the word gene. Gene is the basic information, basic physical information unit which carries all the information from one generation to another. So DNA आपने, I hope you have, you know about the DNA, right? Which carries all the information like nucleic acids and all that. So genes जो हैं basically क्या है? They are made up of DNA, and all those information from one generation to next generation is passed through these genes only, right? तो हर एक इंडिविजुअल में, in each individual you are going to have the different kinds of genes. So because of you are having different kinds of genes, जो आपकी मेकअप है, जेनेटिक मेकअप है, that is entirely different from the other person. तो इसका मतलब है जो variety आ रही है, that the variety that is coming in a particular species is because of the different type of genetic material or genes that exist within that particular species. तो उसको नाम दे दिया हमने genetic diversity. There is high level of diversity among the species. मतलब ये different types of species में तो हमें you already have the different kind of like diversity, but there is even a higher number of level of diversity among the genetic materials of the individual or specific species. बोलता है देखो, see on the surface of the earth you are having different kinds of species, right? So वहां तो है ही है, बोलता है already बहुत ज्यादा है, but again within the species also एक particular species में भी उससे और ज्यादा कहीं जो है वो यू आर गोइंग टू हैव दैट पर्टिकुलर डाइवर्सिटी, एंड दैट इज बिकॉज जो जेनेटिक मटेरियल है दैट यू पोजेस विद इन दैट पर्टिकुलर स्पीसीज दैट इज नॉट द सेम. एग्जांपल, फॉर एग्जांपल an example of genetic diversity is the variation in the genes that encode for the hair color in the humans. For example, मेरा जो hair color है, your hair color could be different. What brings that particular hair color? Or maybe my hair color may not be same as that of my son. So उस केस में वो जो चेंज इन जो हेयर कलर है, what brought that change in, वो जो जेनेटिक मटेरियल जीन है that is responsible for that hairs, वो क्या कर रहा है? that is bringing that change in the color, right? तो वो जो जेनेटिक जीन्स हैं बेसिकली या जेनेटिक मटेरियल है that is creating that diversity within the species, right? एक जस्ट पिक्टोरियली अगर आपने एक व्यू लेना है, you can just have over here. For example, ये कॉर्न है, राइट? कॉर्न कर्नल है, राइट? सो ऑल दोस कॉर्न कर्नल है, तो स्पीसीज की बात करें, इफ यू टॉक अबाउट इन टर्म्स ऑफ स्पीसीज, तो दिस इज ए सिंगल स्पीसीज कॉल्ड एज कॉर्न. बट इस कॉर्न में भी सेम स्पीसीज में यू कुड हैव लाइक द वैरायटी ऑफ कलर्स, वैरायटी ऑफ पैटर्न्स, हाउ यू आर एबल टू गेट. सो दिस इज the assorted colors, different kind of kernels, that means of these we can call these as kernels in the different varieties of corn are result of genetic diversity, because genetic diversity जो है वो genes जो that exist in them, they are providing that distinct particular feature in this particular kind of this particular species, right? The number of genes ranges from about 1000 in a bacteria. एक कोई bacteria ले लें, it could have like 1000 different kind of genes to more than 400,000 in many flowering plants. 4 लाख मतलब एक particular flower में you could find even the 4 lakhs different kinds of genes. Such is the variety or variation that you can find in the genetic material. Each species consists of organisms and virtually no two members of the same species are genetically identical. और वो same two species, same two like जो members हैं of the same species, why they are not identical? That is because of the genetic material, different genetic material that you are going to have, right? And genetic material जो है वो same population में, same species में different genetic material होने के फायदे हैं. You are going to have the advantage, right? For example, when the, let us say, climatic conditions are hostile, let us say you are having a particular climatic conditions, so if that those climatic conditions become hostile, तो हो सकता है जो उस particular species में there may be some of those members, they may possess certain kind of like that genetic material which will make them survive in that particular environment, right? तो उससे होगा क्या, हो सकता है कुछ एक उसके members हैं, they may not tolerate that change in environment, but some of those members who may possess like different kinds of genes, they may be able to adapt to that particular change in climatic conditions. So उससे फायदा क्या हुआ? So you are, that means जो population या वो particular kind of species जो कि हो सकता था because of that environmental changes that may become extinct और हो सकता वो खत्म हो जाती. So now some of them may be able to survive. क्यों हुए? अगर same ही genes होते, let us say सब में, उस species में, if let us say in that particular species if you do have been only one single gene, and if those genes may not be able to tolerate the change in that particular climatic conditions, then whole of that particular population may have just vanished. But because since you are having those different kinds of genes, they may not allow, some of that particular members of that population may be able to survive, and that is how you are going to have the advantage of these different kinds of like genetic biodiversity. So genetic biodiversity serves as a way of populations to adapt to changing environments, right? अगर environment change होता है with more variations, different types of अगर हैं, it is more likely, possibility है that some of the individual in that population will possess variation in alleles. Alleles basically is a form of genes ही है, a variant form, मतलब a different form of like genes को we call them alleles, right? That are suited to that environment. तो हो सकता है कि some of them may possess those kind of like genes which may be able to resist that particular changes in the environment, and therefore may be able to survive, and therefore जो completely अगर vanish होनी होती population, that would not be possible, right? Those, so basically आप क्या बोल सकते हो, that way उस ecosystem में you are making that ecosystem stable. अगर कोई disturbance आ रही है, that disturbance, okay, that is able to influence, but that disturbance is not able to completely vanish that population or that particular species, right? So now that is how you are going to have the benefit of this kind of diversity. Those individuals are more likely to survive to produce offsprings, obviously. Obviously, so they are, sorry, those individuals are more likely to survive to produce offsprings. Offspring मतलब बच्चे bearing that allele, मतलब that particular kind of genes. The population will continue for more generation because of the success of these individuals, right? So that is why आपके जो है जो variety of forms exist कर रही है within that species, that you are able to resist those impacts of those environmental changes, right? So ये कुछ basic है कि what are the how we need to understand what are the basic kinds of biodiversity that exist. So mainly हम बोलते हैं species biodiversity within different kinds of species, then genetic biodiversity, that means within the species, एक ही species के अंदर जो है different kinds of like genes and genetic material, तो हमने बोल दिया उसको genetic diversity. The ecosystem diversity या ecological diversity, different types of ecosystem if you have in that particular area, then we will say it is ecologically diverse है, right? So that is how you have to see the biodiversity and all different types of biodiversities, right? Now let us move on to the next one called as what is the importance of biodiversity to ecosystem? क्या फायदा है that you are going to get अगर एक particular ecosystem, in one ecosystem, particular ecosystem you are going to have a lot of biodiversity. एक फायदा तो हमने देख लिया, बेसिकली यही सेम ही चीज है जो हमने यहाँ डिस्कस की, that they may be able to survive. So you are bringing stability and health to that particular ecosystem, right? So that is the same thing over mentioned over here, and productivity part is the second part that we will discuss. Okay, so how the biodiversity is, you can just say biodiversity किसी भी particular ecosystem के लिए importance क्या है, right? First we say that it brings stability to the ecosystems and brings health, that makes that particular ecosystem healthy, right? Biodiversity essentially provides stability for an ecosystem. Diversity can operate to enhance the stability of the ecosystem function at various ecological stages. For example, genetic diversity can enhance the resistance to the environmental perturbation. Perturbation का मतलब changes or disturbances. तो ये वही चीज है कि आपका जो है stability bring करता है, it brings the stability or maybe health, maintains that particular ecosystem healthy. अगर if there is some changes that takes place in that ecosystem does not get influence, because you are having like wide जो बहुत ही variety है, so they may be able to resist those changes, right? And that is a benefit that you are going to get. अच्छा, इससे related एक model है, even though you don't need to be remember it very specific, but anyway, this is like Paul Ehrlich जो proposed a rivet popper hypothesis, right? कि basically ये rivet popper hypothesis क्या करती है कि how ecosystem जो biodiversity है ecosystem में कैसे influence होती है, right? So for example उसने बोला rivet popper hypothesis, basically क्या है, rivet एक mechanical element है, basically it's something like this way. I hope these people like many of you from mechanical background they already understand. Like जब हमें दो पार्ट्स को ज्वाइन करना है, फॉर एग्जांपल these two प्लेट्स को अगर ज्वाइन करना है, सो वी ड्रिल ए होल और क्या करते हैं हम रिवेट लगा देते हैं, राइट? फॉर एग्जांपल these two plates, ड्रिल ए होल थ्रू these two plates एंड देन एक तरफ से इंसर्ट करो, दूसरी तरफ से प्रेस करके जो है क्या करोगे, व्हेन यू विल प्रेस इट देन अगेन फाइनली दिस इज गोइंग टू मेक दिस काइंड ऑफ स्ट्रक्चर. सो दो पार्ट्स को आपने क्या किया, उसमें होल्ड कर लिया. तो व्हेन यू वांट टू ज्वाइन टू पार्ट्स टुगेदर यू मेक यूज ऑफ ए मैकेनिकल एलिमेंट कॉल्ड एज रिवेट, राइट? एंड सो तो फॉर दिस पर्टिकुलर पॉल एर्लिच ने क्या की, इसको एक्सप्लेन करने के लिए कि हाउ दैट प्रपोज द हाइपोथेसिस फॉर द इफेक्ट ऑफ डिक्रीज इन बायोडाइवर्सिटी ऑन एन इकोसिस्टम, कि इकोसिस्टम में कैसे हाउ बायोडाइवर्सिटी कैन डिक्रीज, राइट? इन्फ्लुएंस कैसे हो सकती है. एग्जाम्पल लिया रहा उसने रिवेट्स का. नाउ रिवेट्स, इवन दो वी मेक यूज ऑफ दिस रिवेट्स टू ज्वाइन मेनी डिफरेंट काइंड्स ऑफ पार्ट्स, इफ यू मे हैव सीन दोस रिवेट्स, जो मोस्ट कॉमन है आपने ब्रिजेस में देखा होगा, स्टील के ब्रिजेस होंगे जहां पर प्लेट्स को आपने ज्वाइन किया हुआ, हेड आपको दिखेंगे ऐसे काइंड ऑफ हेड्स यू विल सी ऑन बोथ साइड्स, राइट? सो वो रिवेट्स हैं, बेसिकली दो प्लेट्स को ज्वाइन करने के लिए यूज किया है. सो एरोप्लेन्स में क्या है, यू मेक यूज ऑफ द रिवेट्स टू ज्वाइन द डिफरेंट शीट्स, राइट? जैसे स्ट्रक्चर जो बाहर से दिखता है आपका, दैट इज मेड अप ऑफ शीट, मे बी लाइक एल्यूमिनियम अलॉय एंड ऑल दैट, तो वो शीट्स का बना होता है. तो उनको ज्वाइन करने और मे बी अंदर और भी बहुत सारे पार्ट्स हैं जहां पर वेयर यू मेक यूज ऑफ द रिवेट्स टू ज्वाइन द डिफरेंट पार्ट्स, राइट? एट द सेम टाइम विंग है, जो एरोप्लेन का विंग है, दो शीट जैसे शीट्स हैं, आपने क्या किया उसको रिवेट, छोटी छोटी रिवेट्स लगाई होती हैं, दे आर लाइक रहेंगी प्लेन, काउंटर संक रिवेट्स बोलते हैं, बट सो दैट दे डोंट कम आउटसाइड दैट पर्टिकुलर प्लेन सरफेस, क्योंकि एरोडायनेमिक्स उसकी जो क्या होती है, इन्फ्लुएंस हो गया. बट यू मेक यूज ऑफ दिस पर्टिकुलर रिवेट्स इन दोस केसेस, राइट? तो उसने क्या उसका एरोप्लेन का एग्जांपल लेके एक्सप्लेन करने की कोशिश की दैट हाउ दैट इकोसिस्टम इज बेसिकली इन्फ्लुएंस. तो इट सेज दैट लेट अस से एरोप्लेन में कोई पैसेंजर जो है, लेट अस से इफ रिमूव्स वन पर्टिकुलर रिवेट, रैंडमली कोई रिवेट रिमूव कर देता है, right, which you will not get the opportunity otherwise, but anyhow if that rivet is removed, तो बोलता है क्या करेगा, over a period of time, at that particular point of time you will not find the influence of removing that rivet from that aeroplane, right? So but in longer run that rivet which you have removed, that can be detrimental to the whole plane, पूरे plane के लिए जो क्या हो सकती है, ये harmful हो सकती है, but in longer run. बट अगर बोलता है इफ यू रिमूव ए पर्टिकुलर रिवेट फ्रॉम ए क्रिटिकल पार्ट लाइक विंग विच इन्फ्लुएंसेस योर एरोडायनेमिक्स, तो बोलता है वो क्रिटिकल पार्ट है और वहां से अगर आप क्या करते हो, रिवेट को निकालते हो, देन it is going to be potentially harmful in a very immediate future, right? So same thing happens with the ecosystem also. He compared that particular rivet with the species. तो अगर रिवेट आपने रैंडमली कहीं से भी ली है, देन इट इज ए, तो इस केस में क्या होगी, वो स्पीसीज होगी. तो उस पूरे इकोसिस्टम में इफ यू रिमूव ए पर्टिकुलर स्पीसीज, if you will damage a particular species, then uska influence pure ecosystem pe may not be that big in the near future, but in longer run it is going to be harmful. Whereas if you will remove the critical species, aisi species which is a key species in that particular ecosystem, is case mein kya hai, rivet which is in that particular wing of the aeroplane, if you will remove that, then it could be potentially harmful in the very near future, immediately also, right? So that is how कि इकोसिस्टम में भी अगर आप क्रिटिकल स्पीसीज को रिमूव कर देते हो, then that whole of that ecosystem may come like crumble down very soon, right? So that is how he has tried to relate this particular rivet popper hypothesis by making use of the rivets as an example from the aeroplane and gave it a name as a rivet popper hypothesis to explain that how that ecosystem can be influenced by the if you remove any particular species from that particular ecosystem. An aeroplane like an ecosystem has thousands of rivets. Rivets को compare किया species के साथ. Removal of rivets species by passengers may not affect the flight safety in the beginning, but the plane will become dangerously weak over a period of time. Removal of rivets of a critical part, अगर आप critical part की rivet remove करते हो, like for example wing, और स्पीसीज परफॉर्मिंग, और इसके इसको इकोसिस्टम में उसको किससे कंपेयर किया, ही कंपेयर्ड इट विद द स्पीसीज परफॉर्मिंग ए मेजर इकोसिस्टम फंक्शन, की स्पीसीज है वहां पर, राइट, विल पोज ए वेरी सीरियस इमीडिएट थ्रेट टू द सेफ्टी, राइट. सो दैट इज हाउ यू हैव टू सी द स्टेबिलिटी एंड इकोसिस्टम हेल्थ. तो बेसिकली क्या है, कोई भी स्पीसीज जो है आप रिमूव करोगे किसी भी इकोसिस्टम से, बेसिकली इट इज नॉट गोइंग टू बी, वो उसकी हेल्थ को इन्फ्लुएंस करेगा, स्टेबिलिटी को इन्फ्लुएंस करेगा, राइट. बट ऑब्वियसली जितना ज्यादा बायोडाइवर्स होगा, बायोडाइवर्सिटी ज्यादा होगी, सो देयर मे बी सम ऑफ दोस स्पीसीज व्हिच विल बी एबल टू रेजिस्ट दैट चेंज एंड देयरफॉर मेक दैट सिस्टम हेल्दी एंड स्टेबल. दैट इज हाउ यू हैव टू रिलेट. प्रोडक्टिविटी अगेन, कि biodiversity of the if larger the biodiversity ज्यादा है, then how it is going to influence your production or productivity in that ecosystem. Ecosystem with higher biodiversity, for example tropical rainforest है, तो वो क्या है, या in those areas जहां पर biodiversity ज्यादा है, tropical rainforest areas है, so there you are going to have a higher productivity. Higher productivity का मतलब हुआ कि larger biomass will be generated in that particular region, right? So ecosystem with higher biodiversity, for example in tropical forests, are more productive. More productive का मतलब है large amount of biomass, right? Living biomass will be produced in that ecosystem. With lower biodiversity than the lower diversity, obviously. अगर आप temperate forest की बात की हमने, या desert area है, तो desert area में क्या है, जो productivity है in that particular ecosystem it is going to be low, because जो biodiversity है उस area में क्या है, that is for less, right? So that is how you can see that how important biodiversity is going to be in a particular ecosystem. Let us now discuss the causes or the factors which are leading to the loss or decline in the biodiversity, right? As you know, we said biodiversity, different life forms. So more specifically when we talk about like animal biodiversity, plant biodiversity, so over a period of time that biodiversity that is declining, and the basic cause is overpopulation. अगर आप पूछोगे, it's the same thing we started like I discussed in case of pollution, and so basic cause क्या है, overpopulation, right? It started with the overpopulation, and then overpopulation, and then it is exploiting, overexploitation, right? तो जो आपकी biodiversity है, let us say एनिमल रिसोर्सेज हैं, ऑब्वियसली जब बायोडाइवर्सिटी, एनिमल बायोडाइवर्सिटी की बात करेंगे, दे आर रिसोर्सेज फॉर यू. व्हेन यू से प्लांट बायोडाइवर्सिटी, दे आर रिसोर्सेज फॉर यू. सो इनडायरेक्टली व्हाट यू आर डूइंग इज, आप उस बायोडाइवर्सिटी को या उस रिसोर्सेज को क्या कर रहे हो, रिड्यूस कर रहे हो थ्रू योर एक्टिविटीज. सो इट कुड बी लाइक एज आई सेड, इट कुड बी लाइक ओवर एक्सप्लॉयटेशन, ओवर पॉपुलेशन में आपने ओवर एक्सप्लॉयट किया. Sometime you destructed that particular habitat. Let us say animal resources हैं, तो जो उनका habitat है, living place है, you destructed that particular habitat, और आपने किया उसको फ्रेगमेंटेशन कर दी, टुकड़े कर दिए उस हैबिटेट के, that also led to the decline in the biodiversity. And also, or maybe like sometimes what you do, pollution is one of the biggest, you can just say, that is the cause of biodiversity decline. You are polluting that particular environment indirectly, what you are, जो वहां पर species रह रही हैं उनको क्या कर रहे हो आप, इफेक्ट कर रहे हो, right? And also in many cases also what we do is, हमने किया है species को एक location से, from one location we brought one particular species and we introduced that species in the other area. So वो क्या हो सकते हैं, उस दूसरे एरिया में जाके जो है, इट कुड बी लाइक इन्वेसिव स्पीसीज. इन्वेसिव का मतलब है वो उस एरिया में जाके दूसरी स्पीसीज को इन्फ्लुएंस कर सकती है इन ए नेगेटिव वे. सो दीज आर सम ऑफ द major threats, yeah, you can say causes which are leading to the decline in biodiversity. So let us try to understand one by one.